Here's a talk I did back in February 2022 before the Ukrainian-Russian war border conflict broke out. I went back through this and listened to it and decided to post it. It's interesting from a point of view that unfortunately what people were trying to get never happened, which was some sort of peaceful solution to this. Here's the talk. Ukraine. The papers are having to step back today from the excesses that they went to over the weekend. They're still front and centre with what's happening in Ukraine. They're still mouthing the warmongering, saber-rattling, Europe facing its biggest conflict since WW2. That's what Prime Minister Johnson has been touting over the weekend in Munich. The whole idea of this seems to be to ramp up the fear factor and ramp up public opinion. I'm not too sure that this works anymore. I'm not too sure if it works in this situation anymore. I would imagine the bulk, lots of people are quite sceptical about whatever governments say these days. And I would imagine there's an element of people in the UK that are entirely sceptical of going to war or getting involved in any more wars, especially after what's happened with Britain and its involvement in conflicts over the last 20 years. Obviously, Iraq and Afghanistan, both in real terms, complete and utter failures. Afghanistan, exceptional failure. 20 years, billions of pounds spent, nothing achieved. No lasting changes whatsoever. It's changed, but it hasn't changed, I don't think, the way that Britain and America had envisaged. Same again, billions of pounds spent. A lot of servicemen died, a lot of servicemen injured. To my mind, no discernible benefit to the people of the UK. Companies have made money, armaments have made money, contract companies out there have made money, oil companies have made money. The average person in the UK, have they benefited from it? I would think the jury is out on that one. Going through some of what the papers are saying that the Russian troops have already received orders to invade Ukraine. That's what the Yankees are claiming. The Yankees are saying it's all done and dusted, and they've put Zs, like for Zorro, on their tanks in big white paint, and that's so that they can tell the difference between the Ruski tanks and the UK Ukrainian. So there you go. Now the big story is that President Macron, he's the froggy Prime Minister, President El Supremo. He's been on the blower to President Putin, and they had like a nice Sunday afternoon chinwag, had a bit chit chat about the football, and had a bit of discussion about Ukraine. And President Putin and President Macron have kind of agreed to discuss a ceasefire. Now that seems to be some sort of meaningful step in the right direction, because obviously in the eastern part of Ukraine there's a minor conflict going on where you have a separatist, rebel, independence movement, pick any of those titles that you feel describes it the best, or insurrection, wherever, or in conflict with Ukrainian forces. The rebels are in essence ethnic Russians who want to leave Ukraine, and they want to join Russia, and they want the place where they live to do that as well. So it's not just people getting up and walking across the border. They're saying this is where we live. We're ethnic Russians. We want to be part of Russia. We should never be part of Ukraine. When it broke up from the USSR in the early 90s, it was only because Ukraine and Russia were basically the same country, like two federal states within the USA. They've got this agreement, they call it the Normandy Agreement, and that's where Russia Ukraine. France and Germany sit down and regularly have a chin wag, and this has been going on for the last 6 or 7 years. Obviously, it hasn't blown up into a big conflict, so must be doing some good, but it hasn't solved the problem. So you could say it hasn't done any good on that. But any time where it's not going into a full-blown war must be helping, and you've got to admire Macron for sticking with it and trying to get some sort of talkie-talkie.
Alert from the cab not completed.
So there's backwards and forwards as to what has and hasn't been agreed. But basically what they're saying is we're going to have an agreement to have a bit chit-chat with the big four. Now the Americans, the Yankees won't be too keen on that because the background and, to my mind, the rebel rousing by the Yankees is entirely revolves around the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and the volumes of gas which Russia is exporting to Germany. In all of this, in the UK papers, there's not one mention of the German Chancellor, the new lad. He is underneath the radar. He is like an U-boat, absolutely missing from any of the discussions, and for all intents and purposes doesn't exist in the UK papers. He's not mentioned at all. Whereas in essence, he is one of the main players in the Nord Stream 2, in whether the pipeline, which is already there, can be commissioned and ticked off, in the insurance companies which oversee that the pipeline and all the infrastructure is up to standards. And usually it's companies like Annex, Veritas, which is like a big insurance company, which insures and complies with for lots of oil and gas projects throughout the world. But the German Chancellor, he's gone fishing. He's doing something. Maybe he's doing loads of stuff. And maybe if you read the Jerry papers, maybe he's front centre in that. But certainly in the UK papers, the only lad that's getting any mention is old President Macron. So some of the stories revolve around that the Ruskies said that they were going to stop the military exercises and all go back to the normal basis. And apparently they're still there. So they're basically saying that Putin's having people on and he's just telling porkies, and they still intend to invade. So you've got President Joseph Biden. He's saying that I'm going to stay in Washington till this is sorted out, and he's prepared to meet Putin anywhere he wants, any sort of format. So hopefully it'll be sort of like a cage match, maybe with some mud, and put the two of them in there and let them have a bit wrestle around. The American embassy in Moscow is advising all the Yankees go home and to leave Russia, which seems a wee bit over the top. But I suppose when you've ratcheted up day by day and bit by bit, over and over again, trying to maintain this level of hyper fear, there's very few cards on the table that you've got left with. So, they've told all the Yankees to get out of Ukraine. Yankees go home from Ukraine. The American embassy is now telling the Yankees in Russia to leave Russia. So I think the American embassy went round and they spoke with all the radical people from the 60s and asked them if they had any of the old signs with Yankees go home. And I think they bought them up cheap. So they don't have to do their new signs with Yankees go home on. To my mind, it's a load of nonsense. I'm sure there's thousands of Americans in Russia, and I would imagine that there's next to no problems with most of them. The Russians are in Belarus, which is a country to the north of Ukraine, and they've been having military exercises with the Ruskies. Basically, probably Russia supplies most of the military hardware, helicopters, tanks, and obviously they're allies with each other. So it's sort of like the Ruski equivalent of NATO. Bear in mind that NATO, in essence, is basically just a proxy for the US. It's a proxy for the Yankees. And you've got the willing fools in it. You've got France and Britain, that supply the heavyweights in it, and you've got the rest of the countries just troop along and ride on the bandwagon and pick up the free lunches and basically don't have to do anything or spend any real money, and they just hide underneath this the Yankee shield, which protects Europe. The Germans have loved this for years and years. It means they don't have to spend any money on defence. It means that they can cut their defence budget to next to nothing, and it means that they can use that money for economic and other social things within that country. So big up to the Jerrys for that. It's a nice plan. It's something that people in the UK should have been doing, and maybe it's the state of the public services in the UK might be a notch or two higher. You've got Blinken, who's the US Secretary of State. He's basically their foreign secretary. He deals with foreign countries, and he's yawping on that it's another sign by Moscow that they're going to invade. Now, they've been saying this for the past 6 weeks, repeatedly, over and over and over again. Like, if you say it enough times, it must make it true. It's like a little girlie stamping her foot and saying, you know, a dolly must be doing this or that or whatever, but blah, blah, blah. He's just mouthing the same script that he's been given, and he's saying that Putin's following a script. So, to my mind, Blinken's following a script, and he's saying that Putin's following a script. Everybody's on script. We don't need any script checkers. And he's saying that the Yankees said that there's a playbook, and that's what the Ruskies are following. And it's obviously a playbook that the Americans wrote, because the Americans have been used in quite a few false flag incidents over the years, going back to the 1800s, 1900s, and up to present day. The Americans are no strangers to false flag incidents and how to create them and make mischief out of them. He's saying that this playbook that the Ruskies have obviously must have pinched off the Yankees, and they're trying to create a series of provocations. Yeah, provocations. Provocation is justifications for aggressications against Ukraine. So it's a standard thing, you know. You say somebody threw the first stone, so that entitles you to throw a boulder at them. And you can go back hundreds, if not thousands of years to see this has been a military tactic that's been used time and time again. And we've got Boris Johnson, Prime Minister Johnson, saying that, that threat, we're threatening with sanctions, but it just mightn't deter him. Putin might still invade, even though we're going to put all of these sanctions on. And obviously, Boris must be a big fan of Star Trek and likes to think logically. And he's having like an ad hominem attack against President Putin. And he's saying that Putin isn't like, he's not like Mr. Spock on Star Trek, because he's thinking illogically. He's thinking illogically. There's something wrong, and he's thinking illogically. He cannot be thinking of invading Ukraine. This is after President Putin repeatedly, day after day, week after week, month after month, telling everybody that listen, that no, he's not going to invade Ukraine. But none of these punters in the West want to listen to that, because they've got our own little agendas. I would imagine Prime Minister Johnson's agenda is, let's take the heat off Partygate. Ooh, what? Somebody trying to change the topics of conversation. Let's take the heat off the NHS being in a big backlog situation of millions upon millions upon millions of people that will take years upon years upon years to sort out. Health service apparently is 40,000 nurses short. 40,000 nurses short. What are you going to do about that, Prime Minister Boris Johnson? What are you going to do about that? Something for the people of the UK. But no. Let's just keep rattling on about this minor border conflict in a country hundreds of miles away from the UK. And here he's going, having a little dig at Putin, and he's saying that, unlike Spock, Putin's acting illogically, and basically it's basically begun. It's begun the beguile. So Prime Minister Johnson, he's been having a bit chin wag with President Macron, so bloody hell. Macron's telephone bill, let's hope he's on one of these plans for unlimited minutes. He's been having a bit chit-chat with Prime Minister Borisson, and apparently he was on the phone for 105 minutes with President Putin. Let's hope he's got one of them plans for unlimited minutes and texts. So, to be fair to President Macron, he seems to be making some slight headway, and he's basically wrangled Putin, or got Putin to agree to some sort of meeting of this Normandy club, and that would involve face-to-face Putin and the president of Ukraine, obviously with the Chancellor of Germany, the invisible man that I think he's called Schultz, nobody knows about, and British papers have made no discernible interest in him. But it would be Macron, the Chancellor of Germany, the Schultz laddie, the President of Ukraine, and President Putin, all sitting down at the same table, having a bit of a chin wag, hopefully trying to resolve this. And from my point of view, I would hope that the President of Ukraine is amenable to some sort of agreement and doesn't stand out for this territorial thing that Ukraine's borders are sacrosanct and can't be changed. If the vast majority of people in the east of Ukraine don't want to be in Ukraine anymore, a sensible way would be to cede that part of the country. In my mind, you can go around the world in lots of places and borders change. Borders have changed. In the UK here, the Scottish-English border has changed numerous times over the years. People in Belarus are saying that the foreign ministers are saying that Ruskies are going to leave at some point once the manoeuvres. And in eastern Ukraine, basically the Ukrainian army is having like a bit of a rumble, and like a ballroom ball. Kremlin back independents, people, separatists, rebels, insurrectionists, troublemakers, whatever term, freedom fighters, whatever term you want to use, somebody can find one that fits what they like to. And obviously each ditch that we get to is the last ditch. The papers and the media constantly have to try and keep this peak fear going. It was last ditch last week, and 2 weeks before it was the last ditch, and a couple of weeks before. Every ditch that you come to now is the last ditch. So basically the agreement that President Macron seems to have got is that with President Putin is that the French foreign minister and the Russian foreign minister, they'll have a bit of a chin wag, work out the details. You know, where we're going to meet up. You fancy meeting up in Berlin? Yeah, there's some really cool bars there. You know, some clubs that could go on to afterwards. Or do we meet up in Paris? Get ourselves down to that where they're all kicking their legs up in the shows and stuff like that. And, you know, we'll have a bit of a touristy thing. Or is there somewhere else that's maybe it's a bit warmer this time of year we could go to? They're going to work out the framework. Now, this will not be well received by the Yankees because it'll be a little tweak in the nose because the Yankees ain't involved in this. When you have the Normandy 4, France, Germany, Ukraine and Russia, the Yankees ain't there. It's the Yankees that is causing a lot of this problems with that reluctance to allow the Jerrys to commission and get into use Nord Stream 2. That's the bottom line of it. The Americans don't want the Ruskies and the Jerrys getting pally. They certainly don't want more gas from, let's say, it's a security. In my mind, it's a cover story. The cover story is that the Americans want the world commodity markets always to be denominated in US dollars. There's a chance, and there's a reasonably big chance, that gets Nord Stream 2 and the Jerrys and the Ruskies sit down and be long-term thinking that the Jerrys will be able to pay for the gas in German euros, pay for it in German euros rather than pay for it in American dollars. The Americans don't like that. To my mind, this is the sole purpose of ramping up Ukraine crisis so that they can say that the Ruskies are bad people, you shouldn't be opening Nord Stream 2. the Americans have pulled every dirty trick in the book so far to get Nord Stream 2, which is the pipeline via the Baltic Sea, which circumvents and goes round Ukraine. Ruskies and the Ukrainians have had a few tiffs about the price of the tariffs that Ukraine charges for the gas transit through that country. That's the gas coming from Russia to Germany primarily. The Russians have built this second pipeline. They'll double the amount of gas that they're able to sell to the Germans, make the Russians a lot of money. The Americans don't want this to happen. The Americans have applied pressure to American companies. They've applied pressure to non-American companies. They've applied pressure to the people that insure the pipes. They've applied pressure to the people that lay the pipes. They've applied pressure right away through the cycle to try and stop Nord Stream 2 from getting built and constructed. Americans have failed. The Ruskies, along with Shell and a bunch of French gas companies, that built this ditch chance that the Yankees have is to paint the Ruskies in a bad light and say, there you go, Ruskies are bad people, shouldn't be buying gas from them, don't open Nord Stream 2. This is in the American vernacular football term, a Hail Mary pass. It's the last gasp, last ditch attempt to try and stop Nord Stream 2. There's no logical reason, there's no economic reason why the Germans shouldn't fire it up and get the gas from Nord Stream 2. It's cheap gas, it's far better for the Germans to have a constant supply of it. The alternative is LPG gas, liquefied petroleum gas, which could come from the United States with all the fracking capacity. Problem is it's more expensive. You've got to liquefy it, you've got to put it in tankers, but also you have to have the infrastructure at the other end to deliquefy it and put it into your gas system. The other big suppliers of gas, I think it's Algeria, Libya, and the Middle East, primarily Qatar, that does LPG. At the present time, the infrastructure isn't there in Germany for LPG. The infrastructure is there for Nord Stream 2. It just needs the green light from the insurance companies. That's the only thing which is stopping it. So if Macron can pull this one off and get a peace agreement between Ukraine and Ruskies, then there's no realistic reason why Schulz, the German Chancellor, gave the green tick and allow Nord Stream 2. If that happens, that's two fingers from President Macron, President Joseph Biden's. That's Macron really, really sticking it President Biden, and President Biden will realise that. So the other thing which has come out of Putin and Macron, the two presidents, is getting some sort of ceasefire. That's a great step in the right direction. Nobody wants to see people killed over these little territorial disputes. In a few years' time, in 10 years, 20, 30 years' time, all of this will be done and dusted. Hopefully the people will be living in peace and hopeful prosperity together. The Ukrainians, the ethnic Russians, and the Russians, there's no need for them to be in conflict. All we're talking about is mutable lines on a map that have constantly changed over the years, and in the future will probably change again. So that's my take. Arrivederci.